Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
you gotta be confident about your Achilles.
Chase Thornton,
Yeah, I mean, I got him at
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to be great and dominate.
Well, all right. Welcome into Operation Domination. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate. Make sure you download your favorite podcast app and check out our video content when you go to the Fantasy Football Advice Network YouTube channel at FF Advice Net. Dan Mater is your host as always, and Adam LaRue in the building. We're just going to be short Chase Thornton for this week, but it's okay because we're talking about potential risers and fallers upcoming in the scouting combine. Now, when it comes to Dynasty and it comes to rookies, Adam's the best. I think I do pretty good, but Adam is definitely the best. And Adam, you wanted to lead this off with an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about first, like how much the combine comes into a rookie's profile, because I think there has been a lot of back and forth. Like it used to be a guy's high 40 time shot someone way up boards. There's kind of been a bit of a correction of, not necessarily worrying so much about 40 times. And I think that there's really a balance to strike between how much some of these things do matter and an overall athletic profile matters, but how, a low 40 may not kill someone if their hand size, for example, is good, or if their medical is good. Like the combine can be won and lost, but it's not necessarily, just the 40 or just, some of these other tests. But I was curious, as well, like how you factor in, the combine testing and the combine process in general, relative to everything else.
Yeah, so to me, I look at it as it's a tool in the toolbox that is the overall prospect or overall process of the prospect profile, right? And I look at it more so as a confirmation or unconfirmation, however you want to look at that, for film watching. We have their production. We have how efficient they were. We have the competition that they did the production against. What the combine does is when you go watch the film, does this player look as fast as he ran? Does he play like that? Or vice versa? Does he play faster than maybe what he did wind up running? Like, why did he disappoint? Was I maybe not seeing something on film I was missing? And maybe he wasn't playing against as good a competition as I thought were, or was it something in the scheme that was getting the player, wide open in the sense of a wide receiver? So it does that for me, where it's like, do I need to go back and watch the film on a player one way or another? And it does score more methodically what your overall athletic profile truly is. I had this conversation a little bit when I was on Fantasy of the Forum with Tyler Bradley and Joe Frick. And they asked, what is your number one combine metric that you go off of? And it's not the 40, it's not the bench press, it's not the 20-yard shuttle. I said the most universal metric that goes for the skill position players and is now being utilized more heavily by teams today on the line of scrimmage is the 3-cone drill. How quick are you? Because most of this game is operated within the line of scrimmage. Like, we love the highlights of the deep pass and all those big plays, but ultimately speaking, this is operated within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, whether you're a wide receiver, a tight end, an offensive lineman, a defensive lineman, a linebacker, whoever. That's where it's operated at. Can you make separation? Can you be quicker to the point of attack than the next player? That's where the 3-cone drill comes in. So if you want a universal metric, that's what I go off of. But all of it to me is a tool in the box from film watching, which I think is ultimately the most important thing. I don't know. Adam, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of that. I think one of the ways I really like to separate prospects out as well immediately post-combine is like, do you have 2 out of 3 when it comes to a good analytical profile, a good athletic profile, and a good film grade from me? And it's not necessarily like that's directly how I rank guys, but like I can kind of go watch, all right, one of these is missing. Why is that? Maybe it's athleticism, and I'll go back and see like, all right, on film, do you look sluggish or not? But like it kind of checks, is one of these things missing? Or like, if you have 3 out of 3 straight out of the box, that's typically a good sign of prospects pretty good. And, if you're at 1 out of 3, like, 2 out of 3, I might go back and check. 1 out of 3 is like probably not the best prospector, especially, none of them is pretty bad prospect. But nonetheless, just kind of grouping it in those categories is definitely helpful. And agreed with, I think Cone, I think the jumps, and candidly, like you get into the line of scrimmage guys, like arm length, hand size, like that kind of thing is where I think the most important metrics are. I take 40 into account personally for linebackers. That's about it.
Oh, that's fair. I mean, can a linebacker cover a lot? That can be discovered if he can actually run a 40 or not.
Well, especially because it is very linear. It's like sideline to sideline.
Yeah, 100%. I like that quite. Yeah, and I like everything you broke it down, because the comparisons, the other players within the draft class, but also the historical comparison too. Like, where did you line up historically? Like, we can never really know if a guy's truly going to hit or not. But if you look at what their attributes are, what their production is, to your point, the hand size and all the profiles that go into it, what we can do is look, how is that historically against players who are comparable in those attributes? How do they go on to perform in the NFL? I mean, it's really the best thing you can do as far as trying to predict, I believe, next to knowing exactly where they wound up at and when their draft capital does come in the scheme and everything that plays the result into that, which we don't get that information until April. So, this is the best kind of process that we can kind of do. So like I said, today's show is about our potential risers and fallers based on the scouting combine that starts next week. Because ultimately, while we'll sit here and make the rational conversation that, yes, the scouting combine should just be a tool in the toolbox, and ultimately I think it is for most teams, we will, without doubt, inevitably see players jump up and jump down in upcoming mock drafts due to how they perform at the combine, because it happens every single year. So each of us came up with 5 players that we thought we could highlight that we think one way or another might jump significantly depending upon how they test, and players that frankly have questions about how they may test coming into it. So Adam, I want to start with you. Number one guy on your list was Elijah Sarratt, the wide receiver from Indiana. A lot of people got to watch Indiana have this great historic season, great playoff run, great national championship. Sarratt was obviously a big part of that. So why is he on your list as a guy who could swing high or swing low with the combine coming up?
Yeah, I mean, he's someone to make matters short. Like, the short story is long speed is a very big question for him. And he's a guy who, at not this past season as much, but definitely at points of his career, especially like the year before last, and even at James Madison, his year there, going down the field has been a big part of his game. So if you come in and you run a 4.6, that's a big problem. I know we just talked about 40 time not necessarily being the most important in a lot of areas, but if you're specifically a wide receiver that is making your living going down the field, then it's kind of hard to do that without long speed. Now, there have been guys who have done that successfully. Anquan Bolden comes to mind as like, you can win down the field without necessarily being the fastest guy of all time. But it certainly helps. So that's a big question for him. And especially, like, are you fast and are you quick without losing weight? Because I think that's another thing that plays into the conversations around the combine, right? Because a lot of these guys are trying to do things like, we're not the only ones making these call outs, like, of ways that a guy could sink or swim based on how they test. So guys might try to cheat it a little bit. If he came in at 195, for example, and got down to a 4.5, that's a lot less exciting than he runs at a natural weight of, I think, around 210 pounds and gets a 4.5, where I think that there's actually something for me to go back and rewatch about his tape. If you lose 15 pounds, you're going to get a little faster, at least ideally. So how he weighs in is a big part of that, because at 210, a 4.5, 6'2", with the analytical profile he comes into, being someone who I do think excels against zones specifically, like, there is something to talk about. He's not a bad player outright. I just worry with his athleticism, how that's going to translate against man coverage against NFL corners, especially getting off the line of scrimmage as an X, where you need to be strong, fast, or both. And I don't know if he's either.
Yeah, so that's one of the things I am very much on the fence about with Sarratt. So I think like best case scenario, you're kind of hoping he winds up like Adam Thielen, right? Who didn't have great long speed, but because he was a technician as a route runner, was able to gain separation and was good in contested catches. Therefore, he could still be a deep threat along with being a possession wide receiver and an effective outside wide receiver at that. Now, Adam Thielen in his heyday, let's not forget, was better as a big slot receiver. Maybe Sarratt could do something similar, but so far through college, we've really only seen him line up on the perimeter. That's kind of what you're hoping he can maybe turn into. I didn't see that I'm not saying he can't develop into it, but I did not see that technical route running in Indiana necessarily. I saw a guy who used his size and used his contested catch ability to really win most of the time. I didn't see a guy who got a lot of great separation, and certainly didn't see a guy who I think gives me reason to believe he's going to pop off in the combine's 40 speed, unless, to your point, he did drop 15 pounds over the last month or so. So that's where I'm with you, or he could definitely swing high, swing low, depending upon how that breaks down. Because even if you think he is Adam Thielen, don't forget Adam Thielen's attributes, his physical attributes, is why he went undrafted. Okay.
Yeah. And even Adam Thielen, just to throw in there, had a good 3-cone. Like we just talked about with the 3-cone being pretty important. He was like 87th percentile there. The 40 wasn't good, but...
Right. So, and that's what I'm going to look at with Sarratt. Like, if you have a 3-cone drill and that's in a good area, then I can believe that you can become a technician in route running. Therefore, I can believe you get separation. Then my concerns about your long speed go away. But that's what we're going to have to see. So that's a good one. I like that one a lot. The number one guy on my list was Emmett Johnson. So currently right now he's being mocked in about the 3rd round. And his average consensus projection through multiple sources is that they're projecting to have about a 4.55 40 time, which is interesting for a guy who was, if you look at his raw production, was overall very, very efficient, right? 6.1 yards per carry, had over 1,500 rushing yards last season. Was a bell cow in the sense he had over 20 carries per game. You had 13, 15 plus carries that went over 15 plus yards. It's weird because he had the breakaways on film. He was 9th in missed forced tackles at 66, but at the same time, he only had a 2.95 yards after contact, which is, it's about average. It's not fantastic. I think this is a type of running back, though, you're looking at as you need to be an explosive guy. That was your profile in Nebraska, to be efficient, to be explosive, to be kind of like a Kenneth Walker to me, if you ask me. Well, in order to be a Kenneth Walker, which I think is what you're kind of asking this guy to do, to be a profile, you're going to have to run a hell of a lot faster than a 4.55 to make that come to fruition. So I'm going to be looking at that. We're looking at the 3-cone drill for him. We already have questions about whether or not he can be a great receiver. Wasn't necessarily asked to do it, but didn't do it a lot nonetheless. And for a guy who's more of his size, and again, I'm going to be curious about his size, you want him to be a type of running back who can be a multi-purpose back. Otherwise, he's probably not going to be a consistent starter in this league. And for a guy who's going in the 3rd round as a running back, you're kind of expected to be a consistent starter at some point during your career. So I do think the combine is going to be a big deal for Emmett Johnson. Where do you come off with him?
Yeah, no, I completely agree, because he's someone who it's interesting. He like checks off as okay to above average in a lot of boxes, but there's not like a lot of things where I'm like, okay, you're awesome at this. You have this excellent trait. So with guys like that, if you're not great at one thing, you kind of just need a good floor all around. And that kind of requires a good floor athletically, especially for someone like, as you mentioned, the 4.55 at 5'11", 200 pounds looks a lot worse than, 5'10", 210 and 4.55. So there's definitely a big range of outcomes for him. I like your inclusion of him. Yeah, I like him.
So your number 2 in your guy is real interesting, because this guy on a lot of boards right now is the number 1 wide receiver being mock drafted, and that's Jordyn Tyson. So walk me through, why is this combine such a big deal for a guy who's expected to be a top 10 pick and the number 1 receiver off the board as of now?
Yeah, it's strictly medical with Jordyn Tyson, and that's what makes this kind of different from the rest of these guys. There's one other guy I'll get to a little bit later who is kind of on a similar path, a similar trajectory. But someone who we won't know if they won the combine until the draft turns around, because it's strictly medical. So it's how teams react to his medical is kind of going to be a big part, at least for me, and how I go ahead and rate him overall, like going into dynasty drafts here in a few months. Draft capital will be a lot for him. And it's just strictly, he's had some pretty serious injuries over his collegiate career. We had a massive, ACL, MCL, massive knee tear in 2022. We have collarbone, I believe, the next season at Colorado. And then he had a hamstring this past year. So someone who has had some pretty significant injuries in the past few years. And if he's going to be someone that can hold up, because again, he's in a similar vein where he's not the biggest guy in the world. He's a little bit lanky. So if it's something where teams look at it and go, all right, we get you into an NFL strength and conditioning program, you get a little bit of weight on your body, everything goes away, then he'll probably go fairly early, versus if they think that there's serious damage here, serious issues, and something that these injuries could be recurring or could predict future injury, he could drop very well in the NFL draft. So he's someone who the combine process is going to matter a lot for, but we won't know. It's not via testing, because I don't think it, within reason, I don't think it matters much how he tests. I think the film is there, and that's all and good, but are you going to be healthy throughout your rookie contract at the very least?
Availability is the best ability, is what they always say. I would also be kind of shocked if Jordyn Tyson tested, and this has been kind of the theme with the top wide receivers, frankly, is that they don't seem to test. Because when you get to the point where you're a top 10 pick, especially as a wide receiver, you almost have nothing to gain by testing and only things to lose. So I don't know if we'll see him test. He will go there. He will get a physical. They will measure him out. So being to your point, that is the most important thing when it comes to Jordyn Tyson. That we will find out. And hopefully, I think our good friend Dr. Brian Scott will be at the Combine. We'll be able to talk to him and see what he's able to find out. He won't be in there on the medical team, just so everybody knows, but he is a medical guy who will be paying attention to those things as that information comes out, and we'll have a great take on it. So hopefully we'll be able to get him on and talk about that leading into the draft. I think it's a big reason why I'm going to have Carnell Tate probably as my number one. And Tyson is my number two. I can't put, so there's some people who really, really love Mekhi Lemon. I cannot personally bring myself to put Mekhi Lemon over Jordyn Tyson, at least not at this point in the process. I don't know that I will. But I do have Carnell Tate, who just doesn't have those medical questions. Maybe he's not the route runner of a Jordyn Tyson, but he's certainly explosive, certainly can be the X guy, certainly can be a number one for a great team, and probably is going to go to the top 10 in his own right. He's going to probably be my number one guy as a result of this. And it's a good catch by you. All right. So my number two is Jonah Coleman. Now, this is somebody that we did talk about a little bit a couple episodes back. Go back and, check it out. Operation Domination Favorite podcast app and on YouTube at FF Advice Net. But, and I said this about Coleman kind of then, this is a guy who right now is currently being mocked in the late second round. He's being mocked as the fourth running back off the board. His projection's about a 4.5 for the 40, which I think might be a little generous, frankly, when I watch the tape. So I'm going to be really kind of curious to see how explosive Jonah Coleman really is. Now, again, we can look at some of his raw efficiency metrics and say, look, it was 5.9 yards per carry. He was involved in both the rushing and the receiving part of the game. But at the same time, his breakaway isn't super awesome. His missed tackle force he only had 35 missed tackles forced in the entire season. We're not talking about a very elusive back. We're talking about a guy who gets contacted, and if he can't power through the contact, he's going down right away. And he doesn't make many guys miss. And he's not going to be a super highlight reel. Not that you necessarily need to be a starting NFL running back, but at the same time, we're looking at Jonah Coleman. If this is somebody who actually got drafted in the second round, he's going to make waves in rookie drafts. He's going to be expected to be a producer at some point. And I think right now what teams are telling me when or at least analysts are telling me when you have a mock draft that high is that you think he's Zach Charbonnet. I don't think he's anywhere near as explosive as Zach Charbonnet. My comp for him was a Woody Marks, who, wound up being fantasy decent and had a decent rookie year because he was put into a situation where he wound up being the only option available. unexpectedly. That was not part of the game plan. They went Joe Mixon. They tried to bring in Nick Chubb. Like, they did not want Woody Marks to be the guy. It just kind of forced their way into doing so. And as we all know, we talked about, last week, even if you're a bad offense, if you got a running back who's getting a ton of volume, he can still be fantasy relevant. That's the role I kind of see Jonah Coleman being in. This isn't a guy who wows me on tape, doesn't wow me with his vision. He just can do a little bit of everything enough to be somebody who's going to have an NFL career. But I don't know how great he's going to be for fantasy football purposes. I really need to see what his 3-cone drill is going to be, what his 40-yard dash is going to be. Can he surprise me? He's a guy who could probably afford to drop a few pounds and not have it affect his game and maybe get that explosiveness. I don't know. What's your take on Jonah Coleman?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you having him here. He's someone who, for me, my analytical profile of him is pretty positive, but I agree it doesn't look as good when watching the tape, but he's someone who, with good testing, I'm definitely going to go back and watch him again and take another look. He would definitely be someone who would earn that right because on the whole, the profile is pretty good. Just sheer amount of how much work he was getting in college. He has a generally good PFF elusive rating. The yards per route run as a receiver and the pass blocking grade are both pretty good. So he's someone who could project to be a multi-down back. The avoided tackles per attempt is pretty decent. Like, there are things to work on here from that aspect, but when you go watch the film, he doesn't necessarily scream NFL running back to me. So one who impresses combine, certainly would go back and check him out again and see if there's something I'm maybe missing or watch some different games and take another look at, because I think he would earn it in that case.
Yeah, totally agree with you there. That's why he's on my list. So you have somebody who we also talked about a couple of weeks ago. Totally agree with this, but is he going to be able to work out? I don't know that he's going to be healthy enough to do so. So that's you got who's your number 3? Yeah,
Nick Singleton is the one who if he is able to, or it just generally like how much it means to him, maybe talking to teams. He is someone who you need to be sold on, whether it's through testing that he's a great athlete or, feel that he's a great athlete going in, but get sold on the person through meetings, through interviews with teams. And of course, having an injury, like being able to medically get that checked out. He's someone with a lot to gain because the athleticism is there. It surely seems, or at least a lot of us expect it to, but it does not seem like, especially as a runner, he's translated that to anything valuable. But he has the frame to be a runner at the NFL level. He has the frame, the athleticism. It's just the in between the ear stuff. So if you go into meetings as a team, even if he's not able to test, which again would be great for him to be able to do so, but even if he's not able to go into meetings and see that he's really serious about the game, really serious about getting better, he's someone who could definitely sell himself to running back coaches who are often, big key pieces of making, these picks, especially when you get into the second and third, which I think on the consensus big board, he's 120 something, 122nd, right in that ballpark. So someone who definitely go, third, fourth round, that's kind of in that range where if there's a pathway for you to succeed, you can be pretty relevant in dynasty drafts, but also, it can go either way, I guess I should say. So he's someone who, the right situation could be really valuable if he sells himself on the right team, but a lot of ways that he could go for sure.
Yeah. So, in case you guys didn't see it, Nick Singleton, just before the Senior Bowl, broke his foot and he had surgery down in Alabama. So he's going to be at the combine. They've already confirmed that he's not going to be able to participate in any kind of drills or anything like that, but we will get the medical breakdown where he's at with his foot surgery. We talked about, look, when the path is clear, the guy breaks away. He's a huge athlete. I just kind of worry that this is another Christian Michael for people who remember him and the kind of in the making, where it's like, man, you're exciting with the ball in your hands. You're a great athlete, but God, your vision's terrible. God, you don't break through tackles when you get hit. Like all those things, like you either have to evade it or nothing. So definitely going to be an interesting guy to see what his prognosis of his foot is. And I think because of that, he's going to be squarely a day 3 pick, but a day 3 pick that's worth a flyer. So I'm glad you brought him up on this list for sure. Let's get to my number 3 guy. And that is Zachariah Branch. So Branch right now is being mocked in the 2nd round. He's being mocked as the 8th wide receiver off the board. His projected 40 time is a 4.35. So we have some heavy expectations on Zachariah Branch, and rightfully so, because he does look like he's legitimately fast when you watch the film and see him play. So this is the type of guy who projects as a slot wide receiver. So I definitely want to see your 3-cone drill. And I want to see it. Are you elite quickness enough, let's say in the vein of an Xavier Worthy, where maybe you can play the outside, or quickness enough, maybe a Zay Flowers would be a better comparison. Are you quick enough where your size is not going to be a hindrance to you being able to play on the perimeter? Because we talked about this a little bit, or maybe this Fantasy Forum show. I can't remember now because I've been on so many. But the personnel changes, the trends in the NFL are leaning away from 11 personnel. It's going more 22 personnel, 12 personnel. I wouldn't say necessarily play more of the fullback, but you're seeing a lot more bigger formations out of the offensive leaders like Sean McVay, who get copied by the rest of the league. So the trend's just going to continue until, something else changes. So slot receivers, while they used to be, especially for full point PPR leagues, big on my board, their value just from that position has dropped for me a little bit, just based on the NFL trends. And again, it comes down to location where you wind up at. There's still teams that run a lot of 11 personnel, but it's dwindling. So I want to know, with Branch, can you play the outside? You're not going to be strong enough to get off the line, but can you be Devonta Smith and be quick enough? So that's going to be the big thing for me, because you're talking about a guy who I generally think, if he has a very impressive combine, we could be talking about Zachariah Branch instead of Casey Concepcion as the 5th receiver off the board, and therefore that would likely make him a first-round pick. If not, we're talking about back in second round, maybe early third round. So I don't know. What's your take here on Zachariah Branch?
Yeah, I think he's a great call. He's someone who, kind of to your point, like the overall testing profile matters quite a bit. And that's not just the testing. That's like, or not just like the 40 and like the big stuff, but quickness. How are the like vert, broad, even like hand size, weight, like all of those things I think for him matter, because him having a really elite athletic profile is something that kind of makes or breaks his overall draft profile. Because he's someone who, I agree, looks great on film, but like the back end stuff, like the yards per out run is about average. It's above average, but not, anything particularly special. His targeted QBR is below average. There are certainly some things that we can explain around that. For example, Jalen Milroe last season being, but nonetheless, like, you can explain away a lot of things if you test like a really, really elite athlete, but it's hard to not question some of the flaws in the rest of your profile if you're an above average to great athlete rather than an elite athlete. I think he's firmly in that range. I don't think there's any world where he's an average or below average athlete, but are you great or are you elite?
Yeah.
In that category.
That matters when you're talking about guys of this size, frankly. I mean, his missed tackles force was 16th. I mean, he can make guys miss. He's definitely elusive. He proved that on the field. He was 25th in slot catches, 50th in slot yards. So we see that. The biggest thing that sticks out to me is his grade versus man coverage, according to PFF, which was 87.5. That tells me you're getting separation when the guys are on top of you. And being that he was a natural slot receiver, I'm not really worried about him against zone either. So that's the big thing. If you can be that good against man, legitimately in the NFL level, you can play the perimeter. That's ultimately what that comes down to. So I want to know if you're going to be on the field more times than not for his fantasy football value. All right, so let's get to your number 4, which is Taylon Green. And I have a feeling we're going to be talking a lot about this guy to the scouting combine. But take me away on that.
Yeah, he's a guy who, candidly, much like Singleton without the injury problem, just has a lot riding on his athleticism going through the process. He's someone who, like, I'll be honest, the analytical profile for him is not kind. It's just not. But he's someone who, I'm not going to say his film grade is good, but I will say that it is better than, that side of things goes, than his statistical profile is. I think he's a little bit better than that. But certainly someone who this lead up to draft process is really, really big for, because he benefits a lot from being in a poor quarterback class, where being the guy who is the great athlete, the guy who has the big arm, is definitely going to be endearing for people. And you can talk yourself out of the problems, for example, when it comes to his turnover-worthy play rate, when you then go look at, okay, but he was the 80th percentile in yards per attempt, but that needs to become, okay, but you're going to be hunting the big play at the NFL level because you've got a big arm. And because, the height, size, weight, speed, combination is all there for you. So someone who the whole athletic package matters quite a bit for, because without it, he's not someone that candidly we would be talking about, because the analytical profile isn't great. And he is definitely someone who would be seen as a project quarterback. But again, there's a pathway for that to matter in this quarterback class, because outside of Fernando Mendoza, there is no sure thing. There is no guy that is definitely next up. Like, we can talk about Ty Simpson probably being that guy now, but it's not like he ended the season all that great. Certainly some questions about who that, the guys after Mendoza are in this class.
It's so wide open. It's so disgustingly wide open. God, I can't get over how much this reminds me of Joe Milton. And that could be his career, which, by the way, like, I know we're still waiting for Joe Milton to pop, but he has value dynasty wise, because people do think it's going to happen at some point. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's really funny that way. And he's going to look great in underwear. He's going to test. In
a normal draft class, this is just Felipe Franks. Like, let's be honest with ourselves.
Sure.
But with how bad this class is, there's a world where one team gets sold.
They're going to see how strong his arm is. They're going to see how athletic he is. And they're going to be talking about, I guarantee you, they're going to be talking about Taylon Green as one of the winners of the combine. I just guarantee it.
Well, I mean, think about it. These teams are also evaluating free agency right now, right? And they're talking about potentially giving massive money to Malik Willis. So if you can talk yourself there, then certainly
talk yourself into Taylon Green.
Yeah, in like a mid-round, of course you can.
Absolutely. Oh man, the quarterback is going to be brutal, that storyline throughout the draft and throughout free agency. All right, so let's get to my number 4, and that's Chris Brazzell, wide receiver out of Tennessee. So he's also being mocked. A lot of receivers getting mocked in the first and second round. He's also being mocked in the second round. Right now, he's the 9th receiver. So he's literally one spot behind Zachariah Branch, but he's a completely different type of wide receiver. The guy's listed as 6'4", 200 pounds. He was a big deep ball threat. I think he's definitely much better than Dante Thornton, who went to the Raiders. So much more talented in that sense, has a much better shot. But here's what surprised me, because I think I definitely saw something more than this on tape. His average consensus 40 time projection is 4.52. And I think if he actually ran at his projection, I feel like that would be a problem. He needs to be faster than that in order for him to solidify second round. If he runs a 4.52 based on what his ability and what his tape showed, I think he'd fall to the 4th round. So I'm kind of confused by the fact that they're projecting him for the second round, but yet his average consensus projection for his 40 time is a 4.52. This is a guy who's going to have to win down the field, win with big plays. That is his game. Now, I think eventually he could evolve into something a little bit more than that. His yards per route run was 2.57. Very, very solid. His contested catch rate was 62.5%. That's not great for a guy who's that big. Like, he had 5 contested catches, which ranks 256, just to kind of give you an idea. Or I'm sorry. Oh, no, my bad. I was reading the wrong thing there for a second. His deep yards is okay. Here we go. His deep catches was 16th. His deep yards was 17th. So it shows you the kind of deep threat wide receiver that this guy was coming down. Yards per route run was 2.57, and his man coverage grade, which is still technically above average, but not nearly as good as we were talking about with Zachariah Branch, was 68.5. So it's a guy who's going to have to win with better fundamental technique and knowing how to use his body coming off the line. He does that and runs a better time than he's projected for. We are talking about a dynamic fantasy big play type wide receiver down the field who's going to be on the field quite a bit because he will play that natural X position if he does get drafted. So that's kind of what we're looking at, but it's you can tell by the way I went through the data, it's a very wide profile. So therefore, you need to test well. But I don't know. Where are you at on Chris Brazzell?
I completely agree. And another indication of how wide that profile is the season prior, where this past season he had, I believe, an 86th or right around their percentile yards per route run, which you gave the example of the 2.7, which is great. Again, 86th percentile, pretty good. 12th percentile the season before. So it's a guy who, outside of having a good profile this year, but there being some questions about his testing and like the whole range problems that you already laid out. There also at Tennessee has been a range of outcomes for him where, last season he had one more reception than the aforementioned Dante Thornton and half the receiving yardage after transferring from Tulane, where he admittedly was pretty good in his redshirt freshman season. But nonetheless, someone who was just in that offense, didn't necessarily have the most success. Had a ton of success this year, had a great season. So just a lot up in the air for him, and someone who really needs to hit all of the marks you need to and be an explosive guy to help your profile out.
And frankly, coming from a college that doesn't have a great track record in producing NFL level wide receivers, we always get enthralled with who Tennessee's number one wide receiver is because they look like an athletic beast. They look like they have great numbers, especially down the field. And then they get to the NFL, and it's been a while since we've seen a Tennessee wide receiver actually kind of pan out here. So he's got all that going into this combine. All right, so let's get to your number 5, which is Elon Raritan. Somebody else we actually talked about a couple of weeks ago. So why is he a make or break on combine?
Yeah, so Raritan, it kind of combines a lot of what we've talked about. So he's also a medical guy. He tore his ACL his senior year of high school, I believe in basketball. Then he came back around his freshman season, and then in practice in October tore his ACL. And that held him out up until the following season, or pretty much through, I think it's all of that following season or almost all of that following season. And then that following season after that, he didn't play a whole lot, just coming off of multiple years of missing time for knee injuries. And then this past season, I think, was a really good collegiate tight end with just under 500 yards, a really solid yards per route run, showing pretty solid ability, and I think is an interesting prospect, and has always had a solid athletic profile, and candidly great size, 6'6", 6'7", somewhere in that range. It's just the medical checkout, and then I think the other really big thing for him outside of just medical, which I'm going to check on the knees, see if there's any risk there, especially at his size. Leg injuries at that height are a problem. But outside of that, can you test well while gaining some weight? Because I believe he's expected to be in like the 240s. And I think that's a big problem for him, especially when it comes to blocking, which maybe isn't going to be as big of a deal as teams run more two tight end sets. But it would help him quite a bit to get up to 260 and still be able to run like even a 4.75 at 260, I think would be really good for his profile on the whole, rather than, a 4.7 at 245, where I don't necessarily feel like I can trust you to block guys even in 2 tight end sets just because of how lanky you are. And then there's just like performing well in the jumps. He's someone who I think probably should, does have that basketball background. I did mention, that being part of him getting one of those knee injuries, but, being able to jump well after those knee injuries bodes, I think, really well for, how he's recovered from them, because that's typically one of the biggest things that go, like the burst and the quickness, not necessarily like long speed, which doesn't have to be impacted as much.
Yeah. So first of all, we love the tight ends who have the basketball background. We're always going for that jackpot. It does work out quite a bit. So you mentioned the weight, and yes, the current weight right now is a little bit of an issue. But when you're talking about a guy who's, was listed at 6'7", probably more like 6'6" coming into the combine, we'll find out for sure. It means he has the frame to add the mass. So that's what I like. So the problem that you run into sometimes with these tight ends who have these intriguing profiles, but you don't really know how they're going to pan out from an NFL standpoint, is because they're like 6'3", 235, 240. And when you're 6'3", 235, 240, you might have maxed out your frame at that point. And it gets a little bit interesting. Like, are you going to be able to play inline block? Do we have to use you as a move tight end? Are you going to line up in the right place to be utilized as a move tight end? All those questions go into it. With Raritan, because he is so big, I'm not questioning that he can't be 250 at some point during his NFL career. So then I go back on, okay, let's look at the athleticism, look at the production. And the guy was number 1 down the field in tight ends this year. He was excellent with his yards per route run. So I'm looking at a guy you're definitely going to want to take a shot on. I believe he's being projected about the 3rd round right now, as it stands today. But a really strong combine could push him in what is a kind of like some of the quarterback class, a weak tight end class after Sarratt into the 2nd round definitively. I don't think no matter what he does, he's going to get in the 1st round, but he could wind up in the 2nd round. That is a real possibility. We saw Terrence Ferguson, for instance, last year, kill at the combine, wound up being a 2nd round pick for the Rams. And still be the 4th string because they use 5,000 tight ends. But nonetheless, he still want to be the 2nd round pick, still has a future because tight ends can hit in 3 years, and it's okay. That could easily be Eli Raritan if he has a good combine. So I'm with you on that, especially with the medical. We'll see how he projects out there. Let's get to my number 5. And that is Kaytron Allen. So we got to mention this guy because we talked about the Penn State running backs, a couple weeks ago. And I said it then, I had to add him to my list again. Right now, he's being projected as a 4th round running back, which, because this is such a weak running back class, is still the 6th running back coming off the board as of this moment. And his projection is a 40 time of a 4.55. If he runs a 4.5 flat, or something close to that, he's a starting NFL running back because his vision is excellent. His contact balance is excellent. He had 57 forced tackles missed. While being a part-time player because he was alongside Nick Singleton throughout the year. So let's not forget that. Like, we're talking about a player who averaged over 100 yards a game, had 1,300 yards rushing for the season, and 6.2 yards per carry. All the efficiency metrics, had 17 carries of 15 plus yards. He made plays happen because guys bounced off of him or he ran through them. And he did it as a part-time player on 210 carries. So if he winds up being just slightly more athletic, and by the way, 3.77 yards after contact, which is fantastic. If he can show that he's a little bit more athletic than what we think, and yet he has that power, he has that touchdown prowess, 15 touchdowns, by the way. He has that contact balance heading into this thing. He will, at minimum, be a better version of Tyler Algier. I'm here to tell you that right now. Because what Tyler Algier lacks, in my opinion, is vision and some explosiveness to a degree. But the big thing is the vision. Kaytron Allen has that. So you take what Tyler Algier has been productive. Like, remember, he was a 1,000-yard rusher his rookie season, because he got to be the early down guy. You could take that with a guy who actually has legitimate NFL vision. You're going to get yourself a pretty productive running back, even if he's not going to necessarily be heavily involved in the passing game, which I don't think he's going to do. Because even if he could do it, we all know NFL teams will pigeonhole you the second you come out of college anyway, if that wasn't your game. So I don't expect that out of Kaytron Allen. And I don't need much. Like, your projections of 4.55. Get close to that sub 4.5, and all of a sudden, I think this guy's going in day 2 instead of day 3, and we're looking at a guy who could be Kyle Manung guy with more athleticism.
Yeah, I think 100% someone who is having an above-average profile helps a lot. Doesn't need to be great, like you mentioned. Above average, it would be massive. He's someone who I know it's become not how we look at prospects as much in recent years, but I think something that still matters to a degree, just as long as you frame it correctly. He started early. Not only did he start early, he started over Singleton, who was the number 1 recruit, the number 1 running back recruit in both of their freshman years. He got, the bulk of the work right away. Between the two as a 4-star, like 15th. So someone who at a big time program in Penn State. And I think that matters to a degree. So someone who has a strong profile, it looks great as a runner, but just you always get concerned about guys athletically, what's the ceiling, and how excited our team's going to be to get them. Because I think he's someone who for sure has a job, for sure is going in the mid rounds, but is he going to be someone where running back coach gets excited and says that they want to build their offense, with this guy in mind? Or is this a guy who's just going to end up somewhere where it's like, all right, come compete for a job? There's a big difference there as well.
No, 100%. All right, so those were our lists. We do have a little bit of time. Chase did do us the courtesy of giving us 5 players. We'll see how much of his list we get through within the hour. His number 1, though, is somebody I do want to talk about because he's absolutely right, and it's true Allar. We talk about how wide open this quarterback class is. Right now, Ty Simpson is the one who's being mocked up as that number 2 quarterback. But we all recognize, I believe, the limitations that come with a Ty Simpson. Drew Allar is somebody I was very, very big on early in his process. Has the arm, has the size that you want. The problem is he didn't have the production, maybe lacked some accuracy, maybe some fundamentals need to get worked on. And then this past year, we were hoping you would see something extra, goes and gets hurt, which can kind of kill this draft stock. And you're saying, well, like, why didn't he stay back another year? Well, because this class is wide open. He's probably, his best shot is probably coming out this year to get drafted. Right now being mocked as a 4th round pick. If he can come out there and show like, dude, I'm a prototype quarterback. I look the part. And there's going to be a coach who's going to say to himself, I can turn that guy into a masterpiece. He is coaching traits away from being a superstar because he's all the other attributes you want. It's going to be really interesting to see how this combine goes for Drew Allar from that standpoint. Like I said, and when I watch him on film, of course, there's things that need to be cleaned up, but I don't think Penn State was in the best position to coach him. It was just completely inept offense, especially when it came to the passing game. So I don't know if he was getting the correct coaching, which does make, in a way, his potential's upside very, very intriguing to me. Where are you falling at on Drew Allar?
I liked him so much if he would have come out last year. He was someone who was really competitive for me last season, which is, I think, a really interesting part of his profile, and somewhere where he serves himself just going through the interviews at the combine is, I think 2023 to 2024 was actually real growth for him. He started to throw the ball down the field a little bit more. He started to be a little bit more accurate underneath. There were still some pain points for him for sure, and he still was struggling in big games, which I think have kind of held true as the knocks against him the entire time. But it seemed like a bit of a step back to 2023 for him going into this season, where he was just very underneath, and it just didn't seem like a very confident quarterback, because when he is confident, he can throw the ball down the field just as well as any quarterback in this class, or at least the good majority of them. He just won't do it. Is not a quarterback who, it's almost like CJ Stroud was more aggressive than him, but someone who just feels like it's afraid to let it rip at times and afraid to run at times when he's athletic enough to run, because he has the same problem or same issue there. There are plays where he looks like a great athlete, and it feels like, all right, if you don't want to let it rip down the field, you can use that more, and just kind of an unwillingness to. And he ended up being a quarterback with great traits, but really conservative, and bad at kind of being a conservative quarterback, to be honest with you. He's not, to your point, ball placement's not necessarily great, especially underneath. There's some timing problems here and there. So someone who the right coaching staff to make him confident, I think, could be interesting, to say the least, but could very well just go in the 5th, given his injury history and given the Hackenberg of it all, because it sounds a lot like the same, candidly, a little bit more athletic for sure, but otherwise,
the one that scares me is that he looks like he could be a Will Levis version. That scares me. But,
yeah. Someone who, when he's under the big lights, has not necessarily succeeded. So really curious how it goes, because I think there are some interesting traits he has, but it's just not, the full profile is not there.
I agree with that. So, and number 2 for Chase was Devin Claiborne, running back out of Wake Forest. Tiny guy, plays in the zone scheme, which is still a majority of the league, because, again, we're all following the Shanahan-McVay trees. And so the issue he's going to run into is that, being that he's a smaller guy, could he ever really break into being an early down back. And then he also has the addition of, can you ever be trusted enough in pass pro to even get it on third downs? So he's kind of in a catch-22 spot there. But the one thing you can do if you're on the smaller side to make yourself a legitimate threat to be an early down back is to show that you are just athletic out of the chute. Claiborne could do that based on some of his tape. What's your take here?
Yeah, he's an interesting one because he's another one of these guys who I think you watch, and I talked about it. One of the most fun watchings of tapes you'll have, this whole process. But he doesn't necessarily grade as well as you'd want in like some key areas. Like I have him at 56th percentile in avoided tackles per attempt. I have him 62nd percentile in yards per route run. So this is a guy who I'd want to be avoiding a lot of tackles, and I'd want to be, effective as a receiver. And I don't want to say he's bad in those areas because those aren't bad numbers. They're just not great. And that's kind of what he needs to overcome his size being a negative for him. So someone who, showing great athleticism, especially quickness, I think would be really big. If you just add a little bit of weight and can potentially sell guys that, you're not going to be a great pass blocker. You're not going to be holding guys off for very long, but you can get in front of a guy for long enough, give your quarterback an extra second. I think things like that can really impact how he gets drafted, because if he's very similar to other guys we talked about, his profile as an above average athlete isn't that much. His profile is a great to elite athlete is something that we can talk about.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. It's a mixed bag when it comes to his production throughout the season. Like 2024, he's over 1,000-yard rusher. This past year, he was over 900 yards. Funny part is 2025, he was more efficient than he was in 2024. He just didn't have as many opportunities and was involved in the passing game enough. So it's something that he's going to have to come out and have a strong combine for him to be even an early day 3 pick, most likely. Let's talk about another one here. If we can squeeze him in. Garrett Nussmeier. Again, just the narrative with the quarterbacks right now. And this is somebody who was coming into this season, people thought he was going to be like a top 5 pick. And then he stunk. And I was never a Garrett Nussmeier guy to begin with. So I'm going to let you kind of take it away a little bit, and then I'll piggyback off of it because I don't want to sound like too much of a hater, but I might.
Yeah. Garrett Nussmeier is just someone who I played really solid, really sound quarterback, I think, last season at LSU. And you can kind of sell yourself on, dad's an offensive coordinator. He's a football mind, coach's son, like the whole thing, just smart quarterback, and that can work. And then as the situation in LSU this past season was a lot worse, he was a lot worse. And candidly, Allar we just talked about. Cade Klubnik is not someone who we talked about, but we talked about a couple shows ago who, all these guys kind of in this mold where their teams just had disaster seasons around them. So not to say that completely defends themselves, but these are guys who have an alibi in a sense if the combine goes great. If he goes and throws against air and the arm looks great and coaches start selling themselves, maybe he does test and maybe he's a little bit more athletic than we kind of figure. We can scapegoat Brian Kelly because we already know that was a disaster. But if not, then you kind of appear as more part of the problem and as a guy who is a better collegiate quarterback than you are an NFL quarterback just because of your physical limitations. So he's someone who, as we've been saying all show, this is a wide open quarterback class. So if you can do anything to set yourself apart, there's still, second, third, fourth place are more or less all to be decided.
Yeah, it's just he just came off this year too much of a dink and dunk quarterback all the way down. I mean, we were only talking about a 7 average yards per depth target, just 6.7 yards per attempt. Very accurate, but you should be accurate if you're not going to go deep ever. But then we also go to the other part of this, which is his average time to throw was 2.48 seconds. So again, that goes hand in hand with him checking the ball down. And yet, despite getting the ball out of his hands quickly, despite being more of a check down guy throughout the entire season, pressure to sack conversion was 19%. Now, 20% is typically the red flag that we look out for, but 19% ain't far off. And when you have a profile of a guy who is checking the ball down and focusing on getting the ball out of his hands quickly, and you still have that high of a pressure to sack ratio, that to me just means I question your ability to read the field. So you're talking about being the coach's son and all this stuff and his football IQ, when I'm like, that tells me that your number one read wasn't wide open. You are panicking with the football. And he's already a smaller guy to begin with who doesn't have a big arm. So all those things, like, you're going to have to be a technician. You're going to have to be deadly accurate, but you're also going to have to be able to push the ball past the 10-yard marker on a more consistent basis in order to be effective. Otherwise, you come and check down and everyone just squeezes you. So I don't know. I'm not a big Garrett Nussmeier fan, but it will be a big combine for him. I think we can squeeze one more in here, and that is Bryce Lance, wide receiver out of North Dakota State. He adds him in here. I know Christian Watson's kind of working out, but I am not a big fan of players that come out of North Dakota State. And I get it. They're like the Alabama, of the tier down from the NCAA. But ultimately, what winds up happening, in my opinion, is that they play against weak competition. The production is not overly impressive for a Bryce Lance for playing against weaker competition. And we wind up with these smaller school guys who just have these long learning curves, and if they don't have teams that are willing to be patient with them, and they're not drafted high enough for teams to want to be that patient with them, I don't know how often they hit. But who knows? The combine is there for players such as that to see if they can overly impress. Do you think Bryce Lance has a chance to overly impress?
I'm not necessarily counting on it. But I mean, there's definitely a pathway for some of these smaller school guys. I think that that's like the situation where the combine matters the most, just in terms of, you can be an average to below average athlete and kind of dominate as the quality of competition goes down. But if you come up and you're still, athletically in the top third, let's say, of your position group for the class, then I think we can talk a little bit more about the nuances of your game and, how your production is against your competition and those kinds of things. And it'd be a little bit more of a reasonable conversation to be having, because it's just hard when you watch some of these guys and it's all right, great. They had, 1,300 yards receiving in Division II, but they run a 4.65 and they're 5'10", 200 pounds. It becomes difficult, but he's someone who has the size at the very least, so he's got that going for him. But what is the athletic profile? Because I think you need a lot of it to win me over. Give him where you're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, because this is how much of an oxymoron that his production is right now. So you're right. He has the size. He's listed as 6'3", 209. Again, we'll see how accurate that is in the combine. So his production is he had 68 targets, 51 receptions, over 1,000 yards, because he had 21.2 yards per reception. So you're thinking, okay, big play type of guy, right? Big explosive play down the field. And true, he was technically 4th in deep yards and 5th in deep ball catches. But right now, his average consensus projection is a 4.6 40 time. So that tells me right off the rip, again, without admittedly, I've not watched a ton of film on Bryce Lance yet to this point in the process, but that tells me right there that your deep ball play came predominantly off your size playing against lesser competition, because it was not your explosiveness. You are not going to be that much bigger than the people defending you in the NFL. You're going to have the athleticism to go alongside that. So, yeah, definitely a guy who's worthy of this list, who's going to need a big combine to show out. But if he comes out there and runs a 4.6, I'm telling you right now, the best case scenario, this guy's getting drafted in the 7th round. Best case. Because people won't take him legitimately. Okay, so that's going to wrap it up for the show. We're not going to quite get to Diego Pavia, but we did talk about him already a couple weeks ago. So again, go back, check it out on Operation Domination. Download, subscribe so you never miss our content, and check out our videos when you go to the Fantasy Football Advice Network YouTube channel at FF Advice Net. We'll be back next week with more domination from Operation Domination. So make sure you guys tune in then, and be good until then.